Mega Man, rock and roll is a really good game, you should play it. No. Alright, so this is a fan game that came out on November 25th, and I've been working on this video ever since, failing to get it out on time, as a means to hopefully bring some more attention to it, because it really deserves it. I'm not gonna beat around the bush here, ladies and gentlemen. This could very easily be the best Mega Man game I've ever played. That's gonna sound exaggeratory, and I don't expect everyone to share that opinion, but I was floored from start to finish. On the surface, it may just appear to be another 8-bit Mega Man title, and if you aren't already a fan, you probably won't think it's as amazing as I'm making it out to be. But for someone who has played through these games as much as I have, I can tell you that this is not just another Mega Man game. This is a brilliantly calculated and passionately thought out project that brings out the very best in this IP. And the fact that it was made by essentially one guy, Dennis Engelhard, is unbelievable. First things first, the presentation. Yes, it's 8-bit, we've seen it before, but it cannot be overstated that the man in charge knows his color palettes. Every stage is full of unprecedented amounts of life and detail. It's insane. Look at this monkey, he knows. The backgrounds in particular deserve a mention for incorporating parallax scrolling. In previous Mega Man games, the background would either move with you or remain static. Here, there are now multiple layers all moving at slightly different times to create a more convincing illusion of depth. This is most noticeable in the game's gorgeous intro level, and it really does help add an extra dimension to the whole experience, making the 8-bit aesthetic feel less like a formality. You will see familiar tropes in regards to the stage theming. There's an ice level, a fire level, desert, forest, underwater, all the stuff we've seen before. It's kind of hard to invent completely new genres these days. But unless it was a blatant reference to a prior game, which there are, it never felt like a copycat. Everything had its own spin. Instead of your token underwater stage, it's deep sea theme set at the bottom of the ocean. Instead of being just another desert level, it's a desert palace. I mean, the Mets have fezzes. The game makes sure to never fall into that trap of being solely derivative of the past, resulting in some of the most refreshing and ambitious stage aesthetics in the franchise. The soundtrack was also a pleasant surprise. While it's not my favorite in the series, I still think 2, 3, and 9 hold the crown. It's a very technically impressive one with a lot of different sounds going on at once, and each track fits its corresponding stage quite well. Heck, the Stealth B theme even has a part that sounds like Megalovania.
911, what's your emergency?
Yes, hello, there's a dancing skeleton in my room again. The only parts that looked kind of weird were the character portraits on the stage select menu. Some of the robot masters look a bit off, like they're not entirely consistent with one another. I wish I could explain it better, I'm not entirely sure what it is. Rock and Roll also have these deadpan stares that kind of freak me out. And sometimes their eyes are just a little too far apart. Dune Woman's in-game sprite also looked like they may have had a hard time conveying all of her details. Since she wears a mask with jewels on it and a flower in her hair, I can imagine it was hard to communicate all of that within the limitations of 8-bit. And as a result, her appearance isn't quite as striking as I'm sure they intended it to be. But those are all very minor things. The majority of the game looks incredible, so I'm not gonna harp on that. The premise this time around is about what you'd expect. 8 robot masters, bald scientist, I'm evil, send him to jail, roll credits, but with a twist. Strange machines are going around abducting robot masters for some unknown reason, and you can see this happening in the intro stage. A fellow robot man will appear only to get sucked up right in front of you with no way to save them. Hey Mega Man, how's it going?
Oh my goodness!
The cool thing about this is that rather than watching a cutscene of what's going on and being disconnected from the gameplay, you get to experience the storytelling in real time and actually witness these events happening firsthand. It's the same kind of in-game storytelling that Mega Man X used, and I guarantee that's where some of the inspiration came from. However, this is really the only time in the game that we see this happen. After the intro, it's back to the standard formula, and for some that may be a disappointment. It's an idea that could definitely be more fleshed out in a potential sequel, but the fact that it's even in the game at all is honestly good enough for me. Proto Man gets caught at the very end and Roll is nearly snagged as well, but like a good brother, Mega Man pushes her out of the way and gets captured instead. This leaves her with no other option but to have Dr. Light suit her up in her own battle armor to go rescue her bro. And thus, the game's namesake comes into play. Throughout the adventure, you get to play as either Rock or Roll. In terms of controls, both Mega Man and Roll feel almost identical, buttery smooth as always. Same ground speed, same buster, same jump height, and both can even slide. Unique to Mega Man is his trusty charge shot that now has this really cool particle effect and a sound cue that no longer pushes the boundaries of my sanity. And of course, his faithful dog Rush makes a return. Rush, on the other hand, cannot charge her buster, does not have access to Rush, and she takes slightly more damage than Mega Man. What she gets in exchange is Beat the Bird, who can carry her over pits, and most importantly, a double jump. And I don't think I need to explain why that's a big deal in a game where half of what you do is jump. Now keep in mind, it doesn't give you the same amount of extra height that a full secondary jump would, as to understandably not become overpowered, but it's just enough to get to those hard to reach places that Mega Man can't, and of course, to help correct any platforming mistakes, which we all know can be a lifesaver. I hesitate to call Roll the easy mode only because she does take more damage, but she's definitely the easier of the two. And at first that had me a little concerned because I thought that I would only play as Roll and would have no reason to go back to Mega Man, which is kind of a problem when he's the main character. Thankfully, while not perfectly equal, each character does have their own time in the spotlight. While Roll's acrobatics make short work of platform-heavy stages, Mega Man is better suited for combat. He outputs more damage while also taking less, giving you more leeway when dealing with a bunch of enemies, and bosses especially. Although I would still have to say that Roll is the better character overall, mainly because once you get good, you'll be taking less hits in general, rendering Mega Man's durability less effective. And her double jump is a speedrunner's best friend. In any case, I still enjoy both characters even if one does carry a slight edge. Now let's talk about that level design, the part of the game that honestly blew me away. Firstly, the pacing is excellent. Every level in this game flows perfectly, clocking in between 3 to 5 minutes casually and 2 to 3 minutes for speedrunning. Not too short, but not too long, just right in the middle, hitting that sweet spot. There also aren't any unnecessary wait times. The game never asks you to just sit still and do nothing, and even when it does slow down, you're always planning your next move in your head. Nothing was ever too fast or too slow. There was never that one enemy that just came out of nowhere or that took an absurd amount of hits to kill. Everything was cohesive and consistent with itself. There was never a dull moment, things were always happening and changing at an appropriate speed. I'm riding a whale spout. Secondly, the creativity is astounding. These are some of the most inventive stage designs I've ever seen in a Mega Man game. It can range from something as simple as using jellyfish to light your way, to activating a set of bombs blocking your path while dodging giant crushing pistons over a conveyor belt. A lot of times though, it was the little things that stuck with me most, like how you can shoot the sand blocks under this Sniper Joe and make him fall into the pit. I got quite a chuckle out of that. Or this descending health pickup that turns out to be a giant robot anglerfish. When you see stuff like that, you know they were having fun behind the scenes. You don't just put things like that in your game unless you're passionate about it. That's not even including the multitude of references to other games in the series. Specifically, Mega Man 1 got a lot of callbacks, which I was shocked to see, but also incredibly stoked for, seeing as how that was my favorite game growing up. I knew right away when I got to this part with all the footholders that it was a direct reference to Iceman's level. Only, you know, it actually works this time. Wily Fortress 1 gets a small nod, Wily 2 gets a complete overhaul, and the Wily 3 boss in this game is a remake of the Wily 3 boss in that game. It even has the hallway of water leading up to it, although the bullets are way more threatening this time. Like, seriously, fellas, you'll get your rent when you fix this damn. But nothing compared to the sheer joy I felt when I dropped down into the secret fireman room. I was grinning like the dang Joker when the old boss music started playing. I was not prepared for that level of nostalgia to flood my system. I nearly jumped out my own window. They even fixed his pattern so he doesn't act like a walking knee-jerk reflex anymore. It was like watching my childhood remaster itself right before my eyes. It's the perfect kind of fan service for a game like this, and I genuinely wasn't expecting any of it, but I welcome it with open arms. Lastly, let's talk about the difficulty, because it is spot on. While I can already hear the screams of pain from beginners, what the fuck? For an experienced player like myself, I could not have been more pleased. This game never pulls its punches. Enemies are always present, dealing appropriate amounts of damage and are gradually combined with environmental hazards. Anyone who's seen Sequelitis will know what I'm talking about right away. For example, in Drake Man's stage, we encounter this fire enemy one-on-one. Hey dude, what's up? Oh. So we're able to observe how it works without any distractions. We then get the same treatment shortly after with this lingering flame that travels across the ground. Once we've seen how these two elements operate independently, the game can then combine them to see if we can take them on at the same time. Now we've got a fire-throwing dude on the right, plus the flame at our feet. And suddenly the encounter feels a lot more difficult, even though we're still technically fighting the same stuff. Because the way that you fight two things at the same time is inherently more complicated than fighting them one-on-one. And that is the foundation upon which Mega Man's difficulty is built. And Rock and Roll does an amazing job at easing players into these difficult scenarios to make sure that you're fully prepared for the demanding challenges it provides. But make no mistake, it's not afraid to get scary either. Every level has many points where you'll be hovering around instant kill hazards like spikes, lasers, and bottomless pits, and you'll have to do some pretty tricky maneuvering to get out unscathed. But the reason that it works here is because rarely is instant death your main penalty. It's there, but you always have a buffer of time before you need to jump a gap or clear some spikes. You're never just thrown into a room and look out! I trusted you. Dying in one hit is really only ever a problem when you make a fundamental mistake, like mistiming a jump or just not putting 2 and 2 together. I don't want to talk about it. It gets a bit craftier and more prevalent by the end of the game, but that's expected. You're meant to be a more well-rounded player by that point. More often than not, I found myself being worn down by attrition, if anything. Enemies slowly chipping away at me from repeat mistakes rather than some spikes I couldn't see, and that's how I prefer it. Even throwaway enemies like Mets always have a degree of timing involved. They're rarely an easy kill, but the punishment for messing up is always small, because they're a small enemy. Oh my god! Something else I really like is how the game never spoils you with E-tanks or health pickups. Since it's so hard already, it automatically feels more deserving to throw the player a bone here and there, and even when it does, items like E-tanks and 1-ups are never just out in the open for you to grab for free. There's always a trick to it, like melting a block of ice and catching it in time, or powering a generator that starts moving and you have to catch up, or just appearing. Here, grab it quick! On top of that, you can only hold up to 3 energy tanks and 1 weapon tank at a time, the lowest amount any game has ever had. And I honestly think it's perfect. You can still stock up on what equates to 3 whole extra life bars to help you through those tough times, but it prevents you from just grinding up to 9 of them and then completely cheesing your way through the final bosses that are supposed to be super challenging and rewarding to beat on your own merits. Unless we're talking about Wily 7, because in that case, I'll take your entire stuff! To drive this point home further, the entire shop and bolt system has been completely removed as well, which is kind of crazy considering it's been a series staple since Mega Man 7. And I know that for many, that will come across as a step back. The shop added a form of currency that could be used to buy upgrades to vary up the gameplay and make it easier on the newcomers, plus it gave an added value to killing enemies. But again, from the perspective of a veteran player, which is clearly the demographic here, I appreciate this omission, because like with having too many E-tanks, the shop was another way for players to grind for bolts and stock up on items to make the game far easier than it was intended to be. Dennis wanted victory to mean something here. He wanted it to be a goal that you could only fully achieve if you had what it took. That's probably how he felt playing the game as a kid, or now, or maybe, I don't know, I'm just guessing. If I had to make one critique to the difficulty, it's that sometimes the game asks you to pay attention to a small detail that's a little out of focus. And if you don't catch on quick enough, you can end up getting hit or even killed in some cases. These pistons in Wily 1 sort of blend into the ceiling and you may not notice them coming down on your first try, or with Reactor Man if you aren't paying attention to these tiny little lights on his wrist. I also find Dune Woman's Sandstorm attack to be a bit too effective. If you aren't already far enough away when she starts it, you won't be able to evade and are guaranteed to get sucked up and take damage. It feels a little too out of the player's control. You have to anticipate really far in advance to get away. Respawning enemies are also still very present. It only got in the way a couple times, but it should probably be removed. It doesn't exactly add a whole lot. All things considered though, the difficulty is pretty perfect. The boss fights were rather formidable as well. They're fairly standard Robot Master battles, nothing mind-blowing, but for a fan game, that's actually kind of a compliment. They feel official, and they'll certainly mess you up on your first go. Drake Man! On a side note, I do want to talk about the weapons real quick. While I typically end up doing a lot of my runs Buster only out of habit, having a good balanced weapon selection is pretty important to the Mega Man legacy. It's kind of been a selling point since the very beginning. Ooh. And I'm happy to say that this is one of the better weapon rosters in the series. Dare I say, top 5 maybe? It doesn't beat out 9 for me. I still think that game's weapons were more reliable overall without being broken, but there are plenty of standouts here. Desert Storm is basically the same thing as Tornado Blow from 9, only instead of a screen nuke, it only affects a portion of the screen. Blast Missile is my go-to heavy hitter as it destroys most enemies in one shot, and you can even adjust its vertical height for better aim and blow up the occasional boulder for accessing different areas. Snow Roller isn't something I use too often, but it freezes all enemies that make contact at full charge, allowing you to stand on them as a temporary platform while also making them an easy target for other weapons. My favorite by far though is the Shield Bubble. Unlike Jewel Satellite, which could effectively last forever against small enemies, the bubble will pop after about 4 or 5 points of damage, and while that may sound inferior, I actually think this is more fair and less exploitable while still remaining incredibly useful for quickly moving through a dangerous area, and it even lets you float in water, which can be used to nab a few goodies and save you from some death traps. I think having more special weapons like this that change how you interact with your environments is an idea the series should continue exploring. Charge Laser is pretty good too, if a bit on the basic side. You can run and gun without needing to be super accurate, but I wish there were more opportunities to interact with these generators. I think think there's only 3 in the whole game. Same with Fire Breath. It has this secondary function of melting ice and even raising the water level at one point, but it's never explored any further than those few moments. It does cause enemies to explode in this X shape that can subsequently damage other nearby enemies, but I find it a bit too precise to set up properly mid-stage. It usually ends up happening on accident, but man, if I don't feel like a wizard when it does happen. Soul Trap is kind of the same deal. It can go diagonal, which is sweet, and it captures the soul of low health enemies, blocking projectiles and letting you throw it in a direction. But while its concept is unique, it doesn't have much more utility than, say, Blast Missile. It's still just a projectile that moves in a direction, only for less damage. Last is the Beetle Drone, a follow-up to the Hornet Chaser in the homing insect minion category. You can have up to 2 at a time, each automatically and periodically homing in on nearby enemies with laser attacks. They can be destroyed by enemy fire, but these guys never miss, which is sweet. The only problem is that you can't use your buster while they're out. You have to wait for them to attack, and that can leave you somewhat vulnerable. If an enemy is coming right for you, but those bugs are on cooldown, you just have to dodge and wait for them to make a move. It limits your playstyle a bit. That's the one downside to an otherwise pretty fun ability. All in all though, this is a really good set of weapons that definitely makes you feel prepared when tackling Wily's castle. Speaking of which, that brings me to my final point, the endgame. This is kind of a personal thing, but when it comes to the Mega Man series, while iconic and typically sporting some fantastic music, the final stages usually aren't that amazing. At least, not as amazing as they should be. With the exceptions of 9 and 10, I'm always left a touch unsatisfied by Wily's castle, wishing there was more to it. Even Mega Man 11, the most recent game, only had 2 Wily stages. Like, what? Where's the rest? But my goodness, it's as if my doppelganger was in charge here, because Rock and Roll's endgame is near perfection. For starters, we have 8 Wily stages. We haven't had this much Wily content since 4, 5, and 6, and even there they had to split it up into 2 different castles and make up some secondary character to justify it. Here though, it's all one smooth ride. This is also the point where the game now selects which character you get to play as, which means that in the case of Roll, her levels are now designed in a way that makes her double jump mandatory, consequently allowing set levels to stand out for Mega Man's, as well as removing her potential label as the easy mode. On the contrary, these levels are anything but easy. We first return to the ocean base from the intro level, only now with a completely revamped stealth challenge where if you shoot at or walk in front of the enemies, you'll trigger the alarm and wake everything up, creating this priority to carefully stay out of enemy sight, resulting in 2 different ways of completing the stage. And since you control both Rock and Roll here for their respective segments, the boss incorporates a tag team element, letting you punch out to the other character once the switch pops back up, giving us another taste of that pseudo co-op. At the castle's entrance, we revisit a lot of the gimmicks from Missile Man's level, but with an extra page taken from Mega Man 4 by lacing the factory near exclusively with Mets. And even though this does result in you fighting fundamentally the same enemy like 40 times, not a single enemy encounter felt repetitive or even unneeded. The boss was kind of frustrating at first because of all the little Mets that kept popping out, but the Soul Trapper does cut a lot of that down. While this is all happening, Roll infiltrates the rooftop, where we get that mandatory use of her double jump to clear those extra wide gaps. And it's from this point on that the platforming in particular gets quite clever. Hope you don't mind if I go on a small tangent here, because too late, I'm doing it. We're introduced to these light bulbs that you can shoot to turn on or off, and the corresponding block outlines will either fill in or disappear. It starts out easy, just light them up and get across, but then it gets a little harder by combining it with the bomb switches from earlier. Unlike before, however, you don't get to see the whole picture ahead of time to plan your move. You can see most of it, but until you slide through and put yourself into danger and take that risk, you can't make a proper assessment of what to do next. This conditions you to be spontaneous and make a smart decision in the moment using instinct based on the info that you do have. Alright, this next part is where things get zesty. You land on a row of these electrically powered blocks. There's a wall to your right halting progress, and the light switch is just above you. So you can't just jump and shoot the bulb to make the wall go away, because that will also make your safety platforms under you go away, sending you to your doom. This means you'll have to jump and shoot while moving right, in anticipation for those blocks to disappear. I know it probably sounds elementary when I put it like that, but trust me, it's important. We later get to practice the same move while shooting maneuver, only this time in a vertical scenario. This helps condition your timing in a new but similar way. In fact, each of these small encounters have conditioned a different aspect of your playstyle to prepare you for the big finale at the end, where you'll have to use all of this information at the same time. And in a nutshell, that is what makes this game's difficulty so potent. It seamlessly teaches you how to tackle this inclined skill curve without being repetitive, bland, or unfair. And you probably won't even notice it while you're playing. Anyway, tangent over. Let's continue. It's very fitting that the boss of this level would be a giant light bulb, and it's actually a pretty hard fight too when you don't know the weakness. But once you figure out how to get inside him and blast him away with a full tank of charge laser, he stands no chance. How does it feel, you swine? Back to Mega Man, we have the Basement Weapons Depot, and boy, if you thought the last level gave you a hard time, you're in for a treat. The central mechanic here is based around these explosive crates that will only be set off once you or an enemy shoots them. So of course, now is the time for giant tackle fire to rain down from the sky and ignite these crates, which are needed at many points to serve as platforms to get across large chasms, once again creating a time limit and asking you to combine your intuition along with your creative problem-solving skills. There's also this cool thematic contrast where most of the level is centered around fire and explosives, but occasionally there will be ice to be melted and even entire underwater sections. Like the boss, which as stated early on in the video, is a brilliant homage to the Wily 3 encounter from Mega Man 1. But nothing could have prepared me for Wily 4 with Roll at the Vault Research Labs. After the map flipped upside down when I selected it, oh man, I had a pretty good feeling that there was gonna be something special about it, like some kind of anti-gravity mechanic. The level is loosely based around the Yellow Devil, which is great, I love that guy, we go way back. But then we get to this part where you climb up a ladder into a closed-off corner. For the first second or two, you may be thinking, where the heck do I go? But then it should click. Well, if I can't go to the left, then I guess I have to go, oh my god! Turns out the level's been given the Pac-Man treatment, and it wastes no time in showing that off to you in the most creatively satisfying ways it can. When I got to this part where I thought I had to jump down to this platform and couldn't reach it, I thought I was gonna fall to my death, but instead, I looped back out the top. And for a moment, I thought I became Christ. It wasn't just that I realized I could do that, I could go down and come out the top and vice versa. It was a bigger realization to put it together that because of this, there are no bottomless pits. You are now in a state of being where you can interact with the game beyond the borders of the screen. It completely alters the lens in which a Mega Man stage is viewed and opens it up in ways I had never considered. I don't think I'll ever be flaccid again. It's only in the second half when the gravity itself starts changing, but rather than flipping the player upside down and constantly reversing your controls, it's merely the environment that is flipped. And I think that's a choice we can all appreciate. This way things are still turned on their heads to give us a wacky perspective without forcing a new and awkward control scheme on us. Thank you. But just when I thought the fun was over, I fell into the boss room where a Yoku block caught me, followed by the appearance of the Yoku Devil. Yep, a boss made entirely out of disappearing and reappearing blocks for getting to the right vantage point set in a room that maintains the same screen looping effect from before, aka it's at this point in the castle where we reach a bit of a detour. We have this level called the Holding Cell Escape Route, but depending on how you've completed the game thus far, you may not even get to see it. I briefly touched upon the Fireman rematch in Drake Man stage early on. Well, all 4 of the Robot Masters that got abducted in the intro level can be found in 4 of the main stages for you to knock some sense into. After that, they become your allies and disperse into Wily's castle to help you out at various points. Honey Woman carrying you over hazards like your Sonic and Tails, Dagger Man teleporting you across rooms, Fireman lighting your way, and Skullman protecting you with his barrier. It was a really cool feeling working alongside bosses that used to be my enemies. At the end of each section, you'll find a security system that can be destroyed to unlock all of the corresponding gates throughout the remaining stages, letting you nab any goodies inside. It's very helpful. But only if you destroy all 4 of these security systems will you unlock the Holding Cell stage, releasing Proto Man from his prison and letting you lead his escape route personally. I had forgotten all about Proto Man by the time this happened, so it was quite the pleasant surprise to get to play as him, let alone in his own level that is heavily inspired by Mega Man 1's Wily 2. They even modified the Gutsman platforms. I haven't seen those things even remotely attempted again. It's also worth mentioning that this is probably the hardest level in the game. Tons of pits, tricky timing, an extra life I don't even want to attempt getting. Seriously, who's gonna grab that? And a triple-decker boss fight against the revamped copy robot. Plus, Proto Man can't use any special weapons, so it's entirely up to you and your trusty shield to get through the day. Clearing those 6 main stages leads us into the finale. And in terms of difficulty, things become noticeably more tame. Up to this point, we've had a slow and steady difficulty curve, with each level becoming more demanding than the one prior. But as per tradition, the last 1 or 2 stages of nearly every Mega Man game are always significantly shorter and easier due to them housing the boss rush and preceding the final boss. They're not so much levels as much as they are segues. The main purpose for this, I imagine, is to reduce the punishment of getting a game over so close to the end. But it certainly creates a noticeable contrast when you get here. The defense bunker is both a vertically descending and ascending act for Roll and Mega Man respectively. And that makes sense considering Roll was at the top of the map and Mega Man was at the bottom. I appreciate that attention to detail. Overall though, it's a pretty standard level. There isn't much special about it aside from a couple rather precise jumps on Mega Man's end. There's no major punishment for missing them either, aside from needing to climb up and try again, so their purpose feels somewhat inconspicuous. Same thing with these rooms that have one enemy in them based on one of the 4 rescued allies. Like, I struggle to see the real significance behind them aside from being intentionally reserved to, once again, not overwhelm the player so close to the boss rush. Speaking of which, we sort of have a tag team mode again. You can pick a capsule with whichever character you'd like, but after you've made your choice, you must alternate to the other character when a boss is defeated, and whoever you finish with will be the one to get taken by Dr. Wily, and the other will have to go to his or her rescue. In Mega Man's case, he'd probably be like, yes, now I can finally return the favor and rescue her this time. Whereas Roll would be like, man, did this guy really just get captured again? Thus bringing us to the final stage of the game, and like I said earlier, it's really short. I mean, really freaking short. We're talking 5 to 6 rooms top, 7 enemies total, and some spikes. What are you looking at? No doubt inspired by the trend that Mega Man 2 started, where you have a few short rooms of danger before the final boss. I get why he did it this way, but if I'm being honest, I think the game would have been even better off had these last 2 stages been full. There are concepts here that I would have liked to see more of, like this wall of octopus batteries that comes flying in like Yellow Devil body parts, and the Shadow Man platforms that drop you after contact. But I also understand that he most likely left them this way intentionally because it meant something to him to maintain that tradition. And that is something I can respect as well. At last, we have the final boss itself. We drop down into a dark room with electrical ambience and our sibling hanging in limbo. When you step inside, you can take the other one's place and pop them out the other side, revealing behind you the Doomsday Machine. Wily's latest creation, accompanied by some of the most insane boss music I've ever heard. It's certainly a formidable opponent, that's for sure. It's got the classic swirly sphere attack, some bouncy guys, superstars, and spinning gears to trip you up. But of course, the main attraction here is being able to re-enter the machine and switch to the other character when you have to reach the other side. It's a very clever boss fight. My only complaint is that the punishment for messing up and falling off of the gears feels more like an annoyance than a proper teaching tool. What I mean is, the only way to make the boss vulnerable is by damaging these glowing orbs, causing the eye opposite to you to open. But if you fall and take too long to get back up, it'll start closing, undoing some of your work. And even if you do get the eye open, if you can't reach it in the allotted time because you keep getting knocked back by these stupid balls, it too will close on you and you'll have to start reopening the other one, then come back over just to try again. That can get irritating rather quickly because it feels like you're losing progress for making mistakes, which ultimately costs you more time. I think once the eye is open, it should stay open until sufficient damage is dealt. I feel like that would lead to less frustration, but still be just as difficult of a final boss. The second phase is still the same machine, but the attacks and weakness change. Wily Capsule, on the other hand, is probably the most creative it's ever been. There are 4 distinct pattern variations, and every time there's a flash of light, it automatically switches you to the other character. So you really gotta watch those health bars. At first, I was quite impatient and would simply ram into him with Shield Bubble, trying to end it quickly, but once I turned off Gen Z mode and took my time, I thoroughly enjoyed making use of the tactics I learned along the way. I think it would have been cool if they put in a surprise 4th form just to shake things up and catch us off guard, but I can understand if that would have been a bit of a stretch. In any case, I'm happy with it. I don't know about you, but I'd say it's about time to wrap this up. With Wily defeated yet again, he tries to make a break for it, but Proto Man stops him right in his tracks. The castle crumbles, Wily goes to prison, and the credits roll in what has to be the most heartfelt staff roll I've ever seen. We see the various robot masters, both old and new, getting on with their lives, and it's nothing short of adorable. Like Tide Man fishing out Splash Woman, Plant Man running away from his insect harem, you pollinated playboy you, Polar Woman taking Fireman ice skating and he singes his beanie off. I can't take it!
It's too cute!
But then, when all is well and the music fades, we get this developer note, and I'm gonna let you read it for yourself. This fan game surprised, excited, frustrated, and impressed me. It even made me laugh a few times. I really wasn't expecting it to make me cry, too. I hope Dennis knows that his father would be immensely proud of him, and that he's responsible for creating one of the greatest pieces of Mega Man media. I know not everyone will agree with that, but every time I see this ending, it reminds me how much passion and heart went into making it. I really can't sing this game's praises enough. I really hope this project gets the recognition it deserves, and I'd love to see what else he has in store for us. Thank you all so much for watching this way longer than intended video that started out as a quick shout out and then evolved into this. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Alright. See ya.